Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really plunging into quite an extraordinary moment in ancient history. You probably know Egypt for its pyramids, its unified empire, right?
Right.
But there was a time it nearly collapsed entirely. Our focus today is Mentuhotep II. He's the pharaoh who didn't just, pull Egypt back from the brink of chaos, but actually forged the magnificent Middle Kingdom. He reshaped the whole civilization.
Absolutely. And our mission here for this deep dive is to pull out the most important insights from, well, quite a stack of sources. We've got Wikipedia excerpts, world history encyclopedia analysis, even an in-depth video script. We're going to explore not just what he did, but really how he managed it. And importantly, why it still matters thousands of years later. How can a fractured society actually be healed?
Okay, so to really get a handle on Mentuhotep II's achievements, which sound monumental, we need to understand the situation he inherited. He described it as a shattered civilization. How bad was it? I mean, what did that actually look like?
Oh, it was incredibly profound. Much more than just political disagreement. Before Mentuhotep II came along, Egypt had gone through over a century of serious instability. We call it the First Intermediate Period, roughly 2181 to 2040 BCE. The strong central power of the old kingdom pharaohs just completely crumble, gone.
Right.
So you had this power vacuum, local governors, these nomarchs, they started gaining more and more autonomy. They basically turned their own provinces into, well, rival kingdoms. Imagine like the whole country broken up into little fiefdoms. No central coordination at all.
Wow.
So it wasn't just political lines on a map changing. It sounds like a genuine breakdown of society. What were the effects for, ordinary Egyptians?
Exactly. It hit hard. Famine was widespread. Trade routes, they just collapsed. And those huge building projects, the pyramids and temples that defined the earlier eras, they stopped completely. Honestly, the very idea of a single unified Egypt must have seemed like a distant memory. It was a really bleak time. Despair, uncertainty. But, amidst all that chaos, a kind of beacon of hope started to emerge. It came from the city of Thebes, or Wasset, as it was known then, down in Upper Egypt. The princes there, they were powerful, and they started steadily expanding their influence. They were fighting rival nomarchs, particularly those from Heracleopolis up north, and slowly, piece by piece, unifying the south.
Okay, so Thebes is gaining strength, and then comes the man himself, Mentuhotep II. He was the sixth ruler of this Theban dynasty, the 11th dynasty. And his reign, you said 51 years. That's impressive. That was the climax of this whole struggle, wasn't it?
It really was. And interestingly, the first 13 years or so of his reign seemed to have been fairly peaceful, at least around Thebes itself. This might suggest he was actually quite young when he took the throne, maybe consolidating his power base locally first.
But then things changed dramatically. You mentioned his 14th year on the throne. Something specific happened, an uprising.
Yes, a really critical event. Our records call it the Year of the Crime of Thinis. Thinis was a town up north, and this uprising was almost certainly connected to that ongoing tension, that simmering conflict with the 10th dynasty rulers based in Heracleopolis.
And what was the crime? What pushed Mentuhotep to really act decisively?
Well, the Heracleopolitan kings did something truly provocative. They desecrated the sacred, ancient royal burial ground at Abydos, which was deep in Upper Egypt, Mentuhotep's territory. This wasn't just a raid, it was sacrilege, a deep spiritual offense.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's what prompted him to send his armies north. It wasn't just about land anymore. It was about restoring sacred order, too.
Precisely. It gave him the justification, the impetus, to really go for total reunification. He dispatched his armies north, specifically to conquer Lower Egypt.
And that path, the reunification, it wasn't quick or easy, right? It was a long slog.
Definitely long and arduous. He was essentially continuing the campaigns his own father, Intef III, had started. But he was the one who finally saw it through. He managed to unify the entire country, probably just before his 39th year as king.
And the cost must have been significant. You mentioned a discovery related to this.
Yes, a very poignant one at Deir el-Bahari, near his later temple complex. Archaeologists found a tomb, a mass grave really, containing 60 soldiers. They were wrapped in linen, but not mummified in the full sense. And crucially, their shrouds had Mentuhotep II's cartouche, his royal name seal on them.
Wow. So these were his men?
Almost certainly. Believed to be heroes who died during that final push for unification. It really brings home the human cost. Another factor that helped was the death of the rival king in the north, Merekher. That significantly weakened the Heracleopolitan kingdom, and, it paved the way for Mentuhotep's final victory.
So victory achieved, country unified. And then in his 39th year, he takes this new title, a very symbolic act.
Hugely symbolic. He adopted a new, powerful royal titulary. That's the set of official names and titles declaring a pharaoh's power and legitimacy. He called himself Semitoe. It literally means he who unifies the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt.
Samatawe, okay. But there was more to it, wasn't there? Something about the Old Kingdom tradition.
Yes, that's key. He was the first pharaoh since the 6th dynasty, so for centuries, to adopt the complete five-fold titulary. This wasn't just, adding more names. It was a deliberate statement. He was consciously reaching back, reestablishing the full divine legitimacy and authority that the Old Kingdom pharaohs had, the authority that had completely dissolved during the first intermediate period.
So it was a signal like, the old ways, the real Egypt is back.
Exactly. It told everyone that the proper divine order, Marat, had been restored. And his subjects, they really bought into it. They saw him as divine, or at least semi-divine. They believed he wasn't just a conqueror, but was bringing about a true spiritual and cultural renewal. This reverence lasted for centuries later. Pharaohs actually held ceremonies honoring his statues.
Huh. And we see this self-deification in his temples, too.
We do. In representations in his temple, he's shown wearing the distinctive headgear of the gods Min and Amun. And he's even called the son of Hathor. It's a clear program of elevating his status beyond just a mortal king.
Okay, so he unifies Egypt, restores the sense of divine kingship, but his ambition didn't stop at the borders, did it? He looked outwards as well.
That's right. Once Egypt was secure, he launched military campaigns beyond its traditional borders, most notably south into Nubia. These campaigns happened in his 29th and 31st years as king. And this is really interesting. It's in the records from these campaigns that we see the very first written appearance of the name Kush, referring to that region.
The first time Kush appears in Egyptian records, that's significant.
It is. It shows a new level of engagement and perhaps control. He also worked to secure Egypt's frontiers generally. For instance, he put a permanent garrison on the island of Elephantine, down near the southern border.
Why there specifically?
It's a strategic spot, allowed for rapid deployment of troops further south into Nubia if needed. We also have evidence, maybe slighter, but evidence nonetheless, of military actions against Canaan to the northeast, and even trade contacts reaching far out. There's an inscription found way out at Gabal el-Uenat, which is near the modern borders of Libya, Sudan, and Chad, so his reach was definitely expanding.
Okay, so he's reunified the country, secured the borders, expanded influence. How did he make sure it all stuck? How did he govern this newly reunified Egypt to prevent it from fracturing again? Because that was the risk, right?
Absolutely. He knew he had to prevent the same decentralization that destroyed the Old Kingdom.
Yeah.
So he initiated a really strong policy of centralization. The goal was clear: reverse the fragmentation. Power was firmly recentered in Thebes, his capital, and he systematically stripped power away from those regional nomarchs.
The ones whose positions had become hereditary.
Exactly. That hereditary aspect was a major source of the previous instability. He needed loyalty directly to him, to the central state. So he created new government positions and, crucially, filled them with loyal men from Thebes.
Bringing his own people in.
Yes. And he didn't just leave them in Thebes. He dispatched officials from the capital to travel the country constantly, keeping tabs on the regional leaders, making sure central policies were actually being implemented everywhere. We know the names of some key figures who helped him run this new administration. Viziers like Baby and Dagi, his treasurer Kedi, who was important enough to organize the King's Sed festival.
The Jubilee you mentioned earlier.
Right. And another treasurer, Mekere, an overseer of sealers named Meru, his general in Tef. These were the guys making the centralized state function day to day.
So with all this achievement, reunification, reorganization, expansion, he needed a monument to match. And that brings us to his mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. You said it was ambitious, innovative.
Oh, absolutely groundbreaking. His mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari was perhaps his most ambitious building project, and it really broke the mold. It's a complete departure from the Old Kingdom pyramid complexes. In many ways, it actually foreshadows the huge temples of the New Kingdom, the ones people often think of, like Karnak or Luxor or Hatshepsut's temple right next door.
How was it so different?
Well, for starters, its location and design. It was built directly into these dramatic limestone cliffs on the west bank of the Nile at Thebes. It's this incredible fusion of architecture and the natural landscape. It had multiple tiers, terraces connected by ramps lined with colonnades, and this central structure, maybe a small pyramid, maybe representing the primordial mound of creation. It was unlike anything Egypt had seen before.
And it wasn't just visually stunning, right? There was a religious shift happening there, too.
Yes, a very important one. This is the earliest mortuary temple we know of, where the king wasn't just passively receiving offerings for his afterlife. Instead, The temple rituals involved the king actively performing ceremonies for the gods, especially the increasingly important Theban god Amun-Ra.
So the king is an active participant in the divine rituals within his own funerary temple.
Exactly. And it also powerfully identified the deceased pharaoh with Osiris, the god of the underworld and resurrection. This was a really profound shift in funerary beliefs and the king's role after death.
That is fascinating. And what about the art inside? Does that tell us anything?
It tells us quite a bit, actually. Much of the decoration seems to have been done by local Theban artists. You can see their distinctive style people depicted with quite large lips and eyes and rather thin bodies. But interestingly, in the chapels dedicated to Mentuhotep's wives, the art is more refined, much closer to the style of the Old Kingdom.
So different styles in the same temple?
Yes. It's thought that these finer reliefs were probably done by craftsmen brought in from Memphis, the old capital, who still followed those Old Kingdom artistic conventions. It's almost like a snapshot of the artistic fragmentation during the First Intermediate period, and you see Mentuhotep starting to bring these different strands back together, even in his art.
And the temple itself, it wasn't always visible, was it? It had to be rediscovered.
Right, another fascinating part of its story. It was completely buried by debris for centuries. It wasn't until 1859 that excavations began, led by Lord Dufferin and others. They actually found the plundered tomb of one of his wives, Queen Tem. And then later, in 1898, Howard Carter, before Tutankhamun, made another huge find there.
What did he find?
He discovered the famous black-seated statue of Mentuhotep II. It was hidden in a cache called the Bab el-Hosan. It's probably the most iconic image we have of the king today. Archaeology also revealed these unique foundation deposits buried under the corners of the temple terrace.
Foundation deposits, what were they?
Like symbolic offerings placed when construction began. They found pits containing things like a cattle skull, jars and bowls filled with fruit, barley, bread.
Oh.
Also a mud brick stamped with Mentuhotep's name, some bronze objects, a faience scepter, and even sheets of fabric, some marked with his name and some marked with the name of his father, Unveiling II.
Showing that continuity again.
Exactly. Linking himself to his lineage, even in the foundations of his monument.
Let's try and picture the whole complex in its heyday. It wasn't just the Cliff Temple, was it?
No, it was much larger. There was a valley temple down near the Nile, connected to the main temple at Deir el-Bahari by this enormous causeway. This causeway was uncovered, 1.2 kilometers long and 46 meters wide. Imagine processing along that.
Incredible scale.
And it led into a huge courtyard in front of the main temple. And get this, the courtyard had a long rectangular flower bed. Archaeology has shown it contained 55 sycamore trees and 8 tamarisk trees. It's one of the very, very few temple gardens from ancient Egypt that we have actual archaeological proof for. It must have been stunning, a statement of life, order, and prosperity returning.
Wow, a garden. And statues, too, you mentioned.
Oh, yes. Lining that processional causeway were at least 22 seated statues of Mentuhotep II himself. He was shown alternating between wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt. These were likely added for his Sed festival, that jubilee celebration in his 39th year, symbolizing his rule over the unified land.
And the actual tomb, where was that?
It was cut deep into the cliff at the very back of the temple complex. A long, sloping passage, a dromos, went down 150 meters. It led to a large burial chamber, 45 meters below the temple courtyard. This chamber was lined with red granite and originally contained an alabaster shrine or chapel. Like most royal tombs, it was plundered in antiquity, sadly. But excavators still found fragments, pieces of wooden coffin, vessels for ointments, a scepter, some arrows, and even miniature models of things he'd need in the afterlife: boats, granaries, bakeries, standard royal burial equipment, but it gives us a glimpse.
So looking back at everything he did, the reunification, the reorganization, the building, the expansion, it's clear his legacy is huge. He wasn't just a pharaoh, he was the architect of the Middle Kingdom, as you put it.
He truly was. His reign didn't just end the chaos, it actively ushered in this new era, the Middle Kingdom, which became renowned for its really refined art, its sophisticated literature, and a strong, effective administration. He succeeded in putting Egypt back together, securing its borders, and kicking off this period of cultural and economic flourishing that, in many ways, rivaled the glories of the Old Kingdom pyramid builders.
And he reminded people of their unity, their shared identity, after that long period of division.
Precisely. He reminded a fractured nation of its sort of inherent unity and its divine destiny. He set the stage for centuries of stability and prosperity that followed. His temple complex at Deir el-Bahari is the physical embodiment of that vision, that artistic revival. And its influence was immense.
Inspiring later pharaohs like Hatshepsut.
Yes, most famously Queen Hatshepsut, who chose to build her own magnificent temple right next door, clearly drawing inspiration from his design centuries later. He wasn't just a king in the military sense. He was seen as a restorer, a healer for the nation, and a true visionary. He literally brought Egypt back from the brink.
And there was even a suggestion he faced personal challenges too, something about elephantiasis.
Yes, there's some skeletal evidence that suggests he might have suffered from elephantiasis, a condition causing swelling. If true, it just adds another layer to his story accomplishing all this monumental task of reunification, potentially while dealing with a chronic, debilitating illness. It speaks volumes about his perseverance.
So, from the absolute chaos of that first intermediate period to the stability and splendor of the Middle Kingdom, Mentuhotep II's story is just this incredibly compelling narrative of revival, of leadership, of sheer vision that reshaped an entire civilization.
It really is. And this deep dive, looking at his achievements, it does raise a really important question for us today, I think. What can we actually learn about resilience, about leadership, maybe even about healing divisions from an ancient pharaoh who faced this profound disunity and somehow managed to restore not just a state, but a nation's identity and its future?
That's the thought to leave with, isn't it? What does it really take for a leader not just to conquer territory, but to genuinely heal and unify a fractured society? And then, on top of that, leave a legacy that inspires people thousands of